In this video I would like to show you what happened in the second game of the mini-match in the quarterfinal between Magnus Carlsen and Gukesh. Magnus won with the black pieces game 1, a very nice technical performance, grinding out a rook endgame. That means Gukesh should play for a win with the black pieces against world's #1, and that's not going to be an easy task for sure. Let's have a look, but before I'm going to show you, please subscribe to the channel, and thanks once again to all of you for making it to more than 1,000 subscribers, but we need to get more, so I hope you will make me a favor, and then I'll do you a favor as well by showing you the highlights of that Magnus game with Gukesh. Magnus playing with the white pieces starts with 1e4, and in a must-win situation, Gukesh goes for the Sicilian. And this is an interesting moment as Magnus decides, okay, I want to play a solid, reliable game. I don't want to get too much theory. So he avoids the open Sicilian and goes for the move c3, the a la pin variation. And being confronted in an interview after the game, Magnus said that this is a very good choice, as it was part of his preparation for the 2021 World Championship match in a similar situation where a draw would be a good result. Let's see if it works out for him this time as well. Black goes d5, ed5, queen takes d5, d4, knight f6, knight f3, all very well-known theory, e6, and Magnus goes for the move bishop e2. It's a very solid continuation. Other people have also experimented here with knight a3, intending either to get a knight into the game via b5 or c4, but bishop e2 is absolutely fine. After c takes d4, c takes d4, the knight goes out to c6, white castles. Both sides are aiming to complete their development as quickly as possible, and here we see that white is playing with an isolated pawn, but can develop its knight to c3 to chase the queen away. The queen will go away, has different options to go to. Queen d6 is the main continuation. The queen looks pretty solid here, preventing the bishop coming out to f4 at this point, but knight b5 is a critical line, attacking the queen. Queen can drop back to d8, and now bishop f4, threatening a knight fork on c7. So black's idea is to counter it with knight d5, covering the c7 square, and in the meantime attacking the bishop on f4. So the bishop goes back to g3, black castles. White goes rook c1, placing the rook on the open file. Bishop to d7, and well, the knight has done its job, cannot deliver a knight fork. It goes back to c3, and I'm thinking this is still pretty much the home preparation Magnus had in mind, also specifically for this game. Position is roughly equal, typical position with an IQP, isolated queen's pawn, but white is also intending to take on d5, playing a symmetrical position, and that also doesn't offer black too many winning chances. Objectively speaking, therefore, I think rook c8 would be a good move to play, pretty close to equality after taking on d5 and black recaptures. But that's not what Gukesh needs in this situation. So instead, he played here the move queen b6. Still, you can take on d5. Black is going to recapture, but the queen is obviously exerting some pressure against the pawns on b2 and d4. But rather than taking on d5, Magnus says, I'm playing here the move bishop c4. I just want to increase the pressure against that knight. I'm threatening to take twice, while the option of taking on c3 gives white a chance to recapture with the b pawn. Then you get a position with hanging pawns, but it also makes it harder for black to attack the pawn on d4. I think white is definitely a bit better here. Bishop on d7 cannot easily move. The rooks are unable to put pressure against these pawns on the c and d file. Therefore, Gukesh goes for knight f6, tries to keep as many pieces on the board as possible. And Magnus played knight a4 to attack the queen and prevent the queen from capturing on b2. Queen goes to a5. And here the knight comes into c5, a nice activation of the knight. And it's based on the fact that black can take twice on c5, but it's definitely not recommended. I mean, after queen takes c5, there is bishop d6 with a double attack, as the bishop is protected by the queen. Loss of material cannot be avoided. Therefore, black doesn't want to take on c5, but that means also the knight is fantastically placed there. Knight takes b7 is an idea, so the bishop goes back to c8. Very passive move. But here again, you keep pieces on the board. White play the move a3. I think that's also a very nice move, as in certain cases you would like to advance the pawn to b4. It's not really possible now, because the pawn on a3 can't be taken in that case. But for instance, if you would play queen b6, b4 is an excellent move, and that knight has a huge grip on black's position. But what is very relevant here is that black has the option to win a pawn by eliminating the protection of the knight. You can take on d4, so that if you do recapture, black captures on c5 and the game continues. But the key move is to start here with b4, to attack the queen, to protect the knight. If queen goes away, the knight on d4 is hanging. Knight takes f3 is forced, queen takes f3, queen got to move away. Now the queen is defending the pawn on a3 very nicely. Queen b6, and for instance here, after a move like rook fd1, I think white has tremendous compensation with two fantastic rooks on the open file. Probably there are potential threats, but the main problem for black is how are you going to get the other pieces still into the game. So I think white's advantage is beyond any doubt here. a3, very good move. Black decided to play here the move queen to d8. But here, various possibilities, and I'm not sure which move is the best. I'd like to reinforce the control over the c5 square so that the rook controls the knight, supports the knight. And therefore it makes sense to drop back with the bishop to a2, so that later on you can still decide what to do with the bishop, maybe to place it on b1, set up a battery with queen and bishop, something we have seen actually in quite a lot of recent games on the channel. And well, that's an interesting move, and it's important to point out also that black cannot really kick the knight away from c5 because of knight takes e6. And here you see why it's so important to clear the c file, as the rook targets that knight on c6. Instead, Magnus had a different idea. He played the move bishop to b5, also clearing the c file, and he has a clear idea to take on c6, forcing black to recapture, landing with a pawn on the c6 square, and then jump in with a knight to e5. And then obviously white's knights are dominating the center, dominating the black bishops. But here Gukesh comes back with the queen to b6, attacking the bishop, and that's an important moment, as Magnus confessed that he overlooked something. He was originally intending here to play the move queen a4 to renew this idea of taking on c6, but then realized in time that the move knight takes d4 does win a pawn. This is a very important tactical shot. If you take with the queen, then the bishop on b5 is unprotected, can just be taken. If you take with a knight instead, well, then the knight on c5 is not sufficiently supported. You can take with a bishop, and black is a pawn up. That means that Magnus had to adjust his plans here, and that's definitely not a good sign. He decided to protect the bishop with the move a4. But now, of course, you understand that b4 is no longer on the agenda. That can always be taken with a knight, for instance. And black untangles. Played here the move rook d8, pressurizing the d file. Queen goes to e2. This was part of Magnus' his plan. And here again, the pawn on d4 can be taken. It was not played by Gukesh, and it was very nice tactical sequence here, which I would like to show you. Magnus' idea was that after knight takes d4, if you take with a rook on d4, you can drop back with a knight to b3. Hit the rook on d4. And if the rook goes away, you gotta keep in mind that there is bishop c7. Here again, the rook covers the c7 square. The queen would be trapped in that case. Black can still try rook e4, counterattacking the queen. But Magnus said that he wanted to take on e4 now with the queen. Knight takes e4, and there is bishop to c7. And after this beautiful queen sacrifice, you are winning back the queen. Black got to give the queen for a bishop. And then white is an exchange up with really good winning chances, obviously. Let's go back to that moment of after knight takes d4, because instead of taking with the rook, there's also the possibility to take the knight on c5. But in that case, there is a5. Now we see the queen is very important on e2 to keep the bishop defended. You're trying to chase the queen away. And if you go queen takes a5, don't take right away on c5 because of rook takes d4. But knight b3 is a nice tactical idea, forking the queen and the bishop. And that means white is going to win a piece. Very nice tactical play. But positionally speaking, white has made some concessions. And the move played by Gukesh is far stronger. Rook d5, putting a bit of pressure on that knight on c5. And here Magnus decided to trade off the bishop for the knight. And I'm not sure that's what you want to do in general. That's a serious positional concession. In my opinion, a move like rook fd1 is the way to go to protect the pawn on d4 and indirectly supporting the knight on c5. Because the plan of taking on c5, winning a pawn, will be met by the exchange of pieces on c5. Then you are going to take on c6, eliminating the defender of the d8 square. The rook comes in. Your pawn up as black. You can still cover the mating threat with knight e8 as the queen protects the knight. But after queen c4, it's another beautiful queen sacrifice attempting to deflect the queen. And the queen got to give up the protection of that knight on e8. If you take on c4, it's rook takes e8 with a back rank mate. And of course, bishop d7 runs into queen takes c6, followed by rook takes a8, and white will be a piece up. So that was a nice tactical idea. Magnus understood that things had not gone his way and was now aiming for simplifications with the move bishop takes c6, queen takes c6. And here a different story is that if you come in with a knight to e5, you go back with the queen to e8, it's passive. But very soon b6 can be played, and there are no tactics on the c-file. Black has the bishop pair, firm grip on the d5 square, so chances to play for something. White instead played here the move b3 to overprotect the pawn on a4. And now the rook goes back to d8. The rook has done its job on d5, and now after bishop h4, the queen can install herself on that square, keeping an eye on both the pawn weaknesses on d4 and b3. Rook fe1, bringing the other piece into play. And okay, black is in control, but should not become too greedy by taking on c5, allowing the rook to come in. And after winning the pawn on b3, which was the main idea, you can weaken black's kingside structure by taking on f6 and bring the rook over to the kingside, followed by queen d2, queen h6. They are devastating threats against the black king, while the other pieces are just spectators on the other side of the board. Don't take that pawn on c5. Gukesh played it very solid with the move b6, kicking the knight back to e4. But now after bishop b7, finally black untangles. And it doesn't really matter that you allow white to capture twice on f6. You get a double pawn, but black is very nice in control with a beautiful battery on this diagonal with queen and bishop, showing that this knight on f3 can't easily move away because of the mating threat on g2. White is unable to impose any serious threats against the black king. And after queen e3, you can go rook a c8. Queen protects the pawn on b3, but white can't do much. White played h3. White has to sit and wait to see if black is able to do something. And if someone is better here, it's definitely black. Queen f5, intending to take on f3 and ruin the structure even further. And we know that in rook endgames, these weak pawns, they become even more vulnerable. But now Magnus stands up, play the move knight h2, intending to come into g4 and hoping to give a knight fork. But of course, that's something Gukesh had seen in advance. He played queen g5, so that after the exchange of queens, he has get rid of that double pawn. Black is still a bit better. Probably is going to place the bishop on d5. Anyway, white doesn't want to exchange queens, although he got to deal with this mating threat on g2 at the same time. Knight g4, king g7. And still, it feels like black is in control, and it's not clear what the knight is planning to do next. But Magnus is very happy to have found the following move, as he is trying to exchange more and more pieces, and also the exchange of pawns will help the weaker side to get closer to a draw. And with a5, you're initiating the exchange of pawns. Idea is that if you take with the queen, there's queen h6, and you land with your knight on f6. This is leading to checkmate by force. Of course, this is a very simple line and did something which will not happen at the highest level. Gukesh felt, okay, I have to exchange queens. Now you take back with a knight. And Magnus says, okay, you can get a pawn on d4. That's what he had seen in advance. Rook takes d4, rook takes c8, bishop takes c8, rook to c1. The rook comes in, hits the bishop. Bishop goes to d7, and now the rook comes to c7. Attacking the pawn on a7. B takes a5, rook takes a7. Attacking the pawn on a5 now. And now a4, b takes a4, bishop takes a4. So we do have an endgame with an extra pawn for black on one side of the board. And you can imagine, if black gets a chance to advance the f-pawn and bring the king and come further with the other pawns as well, then black can make significantly progress. But rook a5 is a very subtle way of neutralizing potential threats, because f5 will be met by rook takes f5. This is a beautiful trick. E takes f5, knight takes f5, and you're winning back the rook. So f5 has been prevented for the moment. King g6 was played, but now the move g4 is played. And this is fantastic technical play by white, because that shows that the double pawn cannot be used efficiently. Bishop c6 looks dangerous, but there are no pieces on the board to make it difficult for the white king. Rook c5, hitting the bishop. Bishop e4, king h2, bringing up the king. Rook d3, king g3, f5. What else? You got to try to find a way to use your extra pawn. But after king f4, black can't take on g4 because the bishop is hanging. If you play f6, g takes f5, bishop takes f5, knight takes f5, e takes f5. If you take on f5 one more time, there's rook takes h3, and you can play on this 2 versus 1 forever, but it's a dead draw. On the other hand, there's no need to trade off that doubled pawn for your h-pawn, and much simpler is to play f3. Now it's 3 versus 2, but it's a double f-pawn, and the pawn is absolutely useless. Magnus had seen this is a sort of a fortress, and after rook d4, king g3, king g5, the rook comes back to the second rank, and you can make waiting moves with your rook there. f4 check, now the king is absolutely safe, and there's no chance to give a check and walk in with your king to g3. If that could happen, black is even having serious winning chances. But now after king h4, king waits on h2, rook d7, rook b2, another waiting move, rook to d3. Actually, if you play here something like rook g7, I think we are just in time to counter it with something like rook b4 to attack the pawn on f4, not giving black the chance to come to g3. Anyway, rook d3 was played. Now the king comes back to g2, king g5, rook b5 check, f5, rook b2, king f6, h4. Now the king cannot come back via the king side any longer. King e5, king f2, Magnus over the draw, which was accepted by black. And that means that Magnus, even though he had a really good position out of the opening, he luckily escaped with a draw from a clearly inferior position in the middle game and endgame. But he showed his technique in both his games. He won a slightly better endgame, and he also managed to save a slightly inferior endgame to go to the semi-final, in which he is going to play against the big surprise of the tournament, Nijat Abbasov. I hope you like this video. Let me know what you think of this game, if Magnus played well or not. He should have played better. Did Gukesh had a chance to win the game? I'm not sure. I don't think so, but maybe you have other ideas. I'm curious to hear from you, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.